I prepared a very brief presentation, about tackling the issue, or the notion of having a youth agenda, para sa mabuting pamamahala, para sa good governance, sa darating na halalan. Bago tayo tumungo doon, muli kami nga pala ang GoodGov PH, isang youth-led movement for good governance in the Philippines, na naniniwala na ang pamamahala ay hindi dapat para sa mga mayayaman lamang o kaya mga makapangyarihan, kundi dapat ito ay mabuting pamamahala para sa mga Pilipino at para sa bayan. So ito ay pinamumunuan ng mga kabataan, dahil sa likas na paniniwala natin na ang kabataan, bilang bahagi ng ating demokrasya ay kayang maging bahagi ng pagbabago. Ang pangako ng demokrasya, kasama ka sa pagbabago. So, yan. So, yung previous speakers natin, they're very inspiring and actually very motivating because they all really emphasize this value, yung 56% ng mga botante sa darating na eleksyon ay nanggagaling sa mga kabataan, from 15 to 30 years old. Now, we have this very unique power to really shape the direction of our country. And it would be even better if we can actually forward important things, important issues na pwede nilang tugunan sa darating na 3 hanggang 6 na taon. And you know what? That's not new. For the past decades, young people have consistently lobbied for an electoral agenda representing different sectors. And more recently, ito yung nakita natin sa news, yung mga youth groups, they launched a 10-point electoral agenda for girls, young women, with very particular demands, for sexual and reproductive health education, livelihood, disaster response, and how these relate to the struggles of Filipino women, children, and girls. And what's often what we often see in these kinds of initiatives is that there is a representation of certain sectors and them wanting to find solutions. But the topic of good governance, it encompasses a lot of sectors. It encompasses, it encapsulates the needs of, a very collective mass, of sectors, of stakeholders, na nangangailangan matugunan, yung mga bagay na yun. So it's a lot more difficult to craft. It's a lot more difficult to come up with these agendas. Kung hindi natin alam kung paano pa natin mas isi-specify at ika-categorize yung gusto natin sa mabuting pamamahala or good governance. So maybe the challenge for us today, the challenge for our participants here today is maybe come up with our own 10-point agenda or how many points agenda specifically for good governance, and to help everyone, help guide everyone in doing this. We go back to what good governance is. And this is a favorite quote of mine, from our former dean when I was an undergraduate student in UPNC PAG. And she just wrote this on a Facebook post. Good governance is a collaborative service for public interest and a shared vision of nation building. Hindi ito inaasa lang sa gobyerno, kundi pinapahalagahan natin yung contributions ng civil society, ng NGOs, ng private sector, ng media, ng academe, lahat ng mga sektor na merong say sa mga nangyayari sa ating lipunan. Pwede silang maging bahagi ng demokrasya natin. Pwede silang maging bahagi ng pamamahala. And so maybe when we start thinking about our agenda, our youth agenda for good governance, maybe we can look at it in a sense that we look at this picture, this very, very simple framework na we demand things on all parts of all these stakeholders. Ano yung gagawin nating civil society sa darating na halalan para ipakommit yung government officials natin? Anong pwede natin gawin bilang bahagi ng private sector No, ano yung gusto nating commitments na makuha from the other stakeholders and so on. And it's important that we look at yung mga actual studies done by experts in the literature and so on para malaman natin ano ba yung dapat, ano ba yung based sa mga pinag-aralan, ano ba yung based sa mga napakatagal na pinagdaanan na consultations, dialogues, ano ba dapat yung gawin natin, diba? And a very simple pag-specify ng categories or pag-characterize ng good governance was done by UNDP way back. So UNDP actually came up with this list of characteristics for good governance. Number one, in order to make this happen, kailangan binavalue mo muna yung participation ng mga stakeholders mo. If you do not provide those platforms for participation, hindi maririnig yung boses nila. Hindi sila magiging bahagi ng pag-uusap. Number two, we need to provide information. It's a constitutional right to information of public concern. If hindi natin alam yung nangyayari sa ating gobyerno, sa pamamahala, paano natin sila i-hold accountable? Paano natin masasabi na kinukurakot pala nila yung pera ng taong bayan? If hindi natin alam kung ano yung mga ginagawa nila, saan nila ginagamit yung pondo nila, paano yung proseso na nangyayari sa paggawa nila ng desisyon and so on. Number three, ginroup together natin yung inclusivity and equity. Basically, gusto natin na walang naiiwan. Whether you're an LGBT, you're a member of an LGBT community, whether your skin color is different, your age is different, your political beliefs or religious beliefs are different, you are not discriminated upon in our society. Syempre, in good governance, gusto din natin na gumagana ang pamamahala sa atin. Dapat effective at higit dyan, dapat efficient. Ibig sabihin, hindi tayo nagsasayang ng resources para sa mga bagay na hindi naman magbibigay ng solusyon sa mga issue or problema ng mga tao. And lastly, yung responsiveness and sustainability. The fact that we need government programs, multi-stakeholder efforts and initiatives to respond to the issues not only of our generation but also of the next generations. Kaya mahalaga yung pagtingin natin sa sustainability lens. Kasi hindi gagana ang participation, transparency, inclusivity, effectiveness kung wala namang kinabukasan na makukuha dahil sinisira natin yung resources na meron tayo. And something that we didn't add here but is also encapsulates all these things is yung rule of law. Yung paniniwala sa checks and balances ng ating pamamahala, na whatever happens, that we will believe in the law, ideally to be fair and just, in making sure that everybody gets a fair share of justice and nobody goes beyond their powers. Walang umaabuso, nag-exploit ng mga kapangyarihan nila laban sa mga mas mahihina o mas walang kaya, kumbaga. And so as we move forward, we see that this is the ideal situation, and this is the reality. We have the goal, yung long-term goal natin, na ambisyon natin 2040, para magkaroon tayo ng matatag, maginhawa na buhay, and yet yung current state natin, because of the pandemic, because of the many different issues in our politics, in our economy, our culture, we find that bumababa yung ranking natin sa corruption perception. Ibig sabihin, mas nakikita tayo bilang mas corrupt na bansa. We remain flawed in many indices about democracies. The Human Rights Watch has flagged us for many political killings, threats, harassments, and the political elite continue to dominate almost all the electoral positions in government. In fact, even the party list system, 'di ba? Hindi na siya naging plataforma ng marginalized and underrepresented. because more than half of all the party list nominees right now are actually connected to existing families or rich businesses. No? So those are concerning matters, diba? And despite that, tayo namang mga kabataan, kung ito yung realidad na pinagdadaanan natin, ito rin yung realidad ng kabataan. Meron tayong pag-asa dahil kinikilala yung kakayahan natin ng ating bayan. It's a constitutional provision. We have laws for it. We have the SK Reform Law. Kinikilala yung kaya nating gawin para maging bahagi ng pagbabago sa ating bayan. And in a way, when we talk about participation, number one, we have these spaces, we have these benefits, that would empower us to directly do something about it. We don't have to wait anymore to get someone elected, but be part of it already. Now, the problem with youth participation in governance, however, is that the Sangguniang Kabataan, our local youth development councils, although they exist, they have not been they have not been maximized. And because of that, a lot of young people tend to not care. They tend to lose that demand or motivation to participate in local governance or even in national governance. They become indifferent because they lack training, they lack institutional LGU support. And then when they do start to work, nagkakaroon ng divide between these institutions, so SKs, yung mga youth organization representatives natin. And the absence of that support needed, that mediating factor, is only making youth governance crumble. So, it's important that we look into the demand and supply of youth leaders. So, paano natin i-generate yung demand? Paano natin padadamihin yung supply ng mga magagaling na youth leaders, hindi lang para sa SK, pero sa mga darating na election. And maybe, sa ating youth agenda, we can think about participation. How might we get more young people to participate in local governance? Diba? So, yeah. So that's one part of participation that maybe in our youth agenda we have to talk about. Next is the matter of transparency and accountability in our country. As I mentioned earlier, bumaba tayo in terms of corruption perception index. It means to the world we see more corrupt now than before. Despite that, young people are actively working on campaigns for a National Freedom of Information Policy, or the FOI law, as well as its implementation. In fact, many electoral and voter education campaigns today, sinishare nila how do you use FOI as a tool to demand greater accountability and make informed voting happen in the upcoming elections. Another study also mentioned that there is a lack of clear, accessible accountability platforms for youth governance. So balik tayo sa usapin ng mga SK at LYBC, for young people, kapag gusto ko magreklamo tungkol sa mga inactive or hindi gumagalaw na mga leaders, hindi ko alam kung saan ako pupunta. Hindi ko alam kung ano yung proseso ng pag-demand ng accountability na yun. And when we talk about these problems, maybe that's something that we can have in our youth agenda to be resolved. Now, inclusivity and equity, this is very important, especially because of the pandemic. Nakita natin bilang mga mag-aaral, mga estudyante, na sobrang disproportionate ng access to quality education. Kapag wala kang laptop, kapag mahina yung internet mo, wala ka na talaga. Diba? Yung access to healthcare, especially because of COVID-19, our employment and livelihood opportunities further pushed to the margins. Our indigenous people being pushed, being marginalized because of their locations, their culture, their traditions, and even gender inequality and gender-based violence, especially nung nag-lockdown, nagkaroon ng nagka-quarantine and so on. A lot more young people are actually at risk doon sa gender-based violence as per many studies. So These are important issues that governance can solve through the right policies, through the right programs, through the right commitments, political will from our government officials. In terms of effectiveness and efficiency, paulit-ulit ini-emphasize yung digital divide na tinatawag. Na the Philippines was not prepared for the pandemic because we were far too traditional. We were far too reliant on manual, yung analog, or print technology, as compared to many other countries, that were able to respond faster, that we were able to um analyze data quicker, in order to implement policy. So kailangan natin bilisan yung technological progress natin in terms of governance and bureaucracy. And another thing that I found interesting, when I was reading this paper from NEDA, is yung fact that citizen empowerment is actually essential for service delivery. It's not just their management anymore, but citizen demand. If we continue to assert our demand for better, more results-based performance management, for example, and actually seeing these things happen, diba? Feeling the effects of better service delivery, we can make government work more effective and more efficient. And this is actually very closely related to transparency and accountability characteristic ng good governance. Because by making sure that they are working effectively, we are actually demanding that accountability from them, because that is what the Filipino people deserves. Now we move on to responsiveness and sustainability, and a lot of development institutions have cited the risks that especially Filipino people, Filipino youth face, because of the climate crisis. The Philippines, and our children, our Filipino youth, are very much exposed to mga environmental hazards natin, because of climate change. So yung mga floods, yung mga disasters. Even earlier, I think there was a news about Taal volcano again, it might erupt or something like that. May warning. So and ito yung direct impact ng climate change na nararanasan natin. And I think this is what fuels a lot of young leaders to mobilize and ask their LGU officials, their national government officials, to do something about it, at least in the Philippines and so on. Another thing that was highlighted during the pandemic were the limitations of public transportation and mobility, especially for young people. Young people relied on commute, public transportation, and when the pandemic happened, relying on commute and public transportation would put your life at risk. So nakita natin na we need to invest more in people, in transporting people and not just cars or vehicles. Diba? And we also know that it will really help the country, kung yung environment natin, kung babawasan natin, or i-regulate natin yung pagdaloy ng mga sasakyan, at mas mag-i-invest tayo sa public transportation efforts. Now, to cap this off, we also saw that the progress of the SDGs have been really threatened by the pandemic. A lot of these indicators, education, against hunger, nutrition, and so on, sobrang bumagal sila because of the pandemic. And yung pagbagal na yun actually affects millions of our younger generations, and that would make waves, in the long term. Many of these people, yung mga walang access to education right now, for example, eventually sila yung pinakamahirapan makahanap ng trabaho at hanap buhay. So, we see that our quest, our search for sustainable development encompasses a lot of these things. And lastly, siguro I didn't add this slide because I mentioned earlier, but the rule of law aspect as well matters. There have been many yung mga laws recently enacted that threatened freedom of expression, the anti-terror law. That's something that many youth groups, including us, no, sa GoodGov PH, we joined the petition to have some provisions of it held unconstitutional, diba? Because it gave that chilling effect. Because the provisions were too vague, no? We were really threatened na baka kapag nagsabi ka ng isang bagay, ma-red tag ka, mahuli ka. No? And if red tagging in itself, it goes beyond, no, the law, and it affects a lot of young people. So moving forward, we emphasize, no, na sa demokrasya kasama ang kabataan sa pagbabago. And bakit, kung ganun yung sinasabi natin, bakit puro problema yung inilalabas ko, hindi yung mga solusyon na dapat lumabas sa youth agenda? And that's because, no, that's the challenge for young people. No, we have to look at, you know, the issues, the realities, and from there derive our own solutions. The youth, I cannot impose a youth agenda, and you'll find that literature would just have solutions recommended, no? Pero the agenda that we want right now, it's something that we have to craft, no, collectively. It's something that we have to frame, no, according to good governance principles. And I think that as young people, we can work together on this. Especially later, I know we will have discussions in the breakout rooms. So, bilang pagtatapos, ang hamon sa atin, no, kung ito ang realidad, kung ito yung nangyayari sa konteksto ng mabuting pamamahala sa Pilipinas, ano ang agendang ilalakad natin? Ano ang agendang isusulong natin para sa mabuting pamamahala? Ang makakasagot lang yan ay tayo mismong mga kabataan. Sabi nga natin, tayo naman, no, sa darating na halalan. Yun lamang at maraming salamat.